Welcome to the Consultancy Edge. I'm your host, Matt Hodkinson, and today's guest is Martin J. Williams, founder of Camford Management Consultants, where he's advised consulting firms for over a decade. He's delivered more than 60 consulting assignments across 4 continents and built proprietary frameworks like the 3-9 marketing strategy and the pyramid of trust. In this episode, we unpack what happens when referrals dry up and how to escape that trap, the moment Martin hit financial rock bottom and turned it into a marketing philosophy, and why trust trumps traffic, and what that really means in today's noisy market. Let's dive right in. Welcome to the Consultancy Edge. Martin J. Williams, how are you today, sir?
Very well, thank you, Matt. Pleased to be here.
Right, before we get into things, tell people why the J in your name is important, would you? You've just told me that story.
So in my last full-time role that I went for, there was down to 2, and we were both called Martin Williams, which are 2 common names. And I was paranoid that I'd walk in on the first day and they'd be like, "Oh, no, not you." I meant the other one. So because of that, I've always put the J in the middle. And then, as I was just saying, what's quite useful there is because in my LinkedIn profile it's Martin space J. It then means when people send automated messages to me, I can see it, which kind of helps me decide whether to ignore stuff or not. So it's a bit of a side benefit. But yeah, it kind of helps. There's still other Martin J. Williamses, obviously, but
Yeah,
it gets me a little bit more distinct.
nice little filter, because who's going to say hi Martin J in their
Yeah,
LinkedIn DMs
exactly.
if they've written it themselves? Martin, tell us before we get into things a little bit about what you do at Camford Management Consulting.
Yeah, sure. So at Camford, what we do is we help generally boutique consulting firms to get away from the reliance or the over-reliance on referrals and repeat business. Simply because most consultancies don't really want to do marketing and selling. They just want people to turn up and buy. And I'd like that too. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So really, it's about helping them understand how to market properly, which is something that they've probably never really done. And when they do approach it, it's nearly always inside out and back to front. We can talk more about what I mean by that.
Yeah, and
If you
we're
need to.
completely aligned on this idea of the over-reliance on referrals, which I see as well. But by the same token, we still see a number of consultancies who don't sort of feed their referral pipeline either. They haven't really got a robust referral strategy. So I just want to head this off. What we're not saying is stop generating referrals, because it's the ultimate sign that you're doing good work, right? And how do you find the right balance, do you feel?
Uh, it's one of the frustrations with doing anything around kind of marketing, BD, etc., which is you have to do it all, right? Within reason. You can't do everything, but you I think different things work at different periods of times. We were talking a moment ago about how the economy has changed. So different if you've got your marketing working well and you've got referrals working well and you're getting repeat business, and you can kind of move those levers up and down as you need to, depending on what's happening in the wider world. So I think the balance is you kind of need to be doing a bit of everything, sometimes more of one thing, other times more of another.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing about referrals is you never, however robust your referral strategy, you never really know when that next introduction is going to come, and you never know how warm that introduction is going to be either, right?
Yeah, I always see it as there's in my mind, there's 2 types of referrals. There's the asked for referral and there's the earned referral. And the asked for is what business coaches will tell you to do. Always ask for a referral. And there's a right time and a place to do that. It's good practice. But there's also the ones that come from nowhere, where you get an email come through which says, "Oh, someone told me I should speak to you," or whatever. Or, I had a call um, earlier in the year where a guy phoned up and said, "Our CEO loves all the stuff that you do. Wanted to have a conversation." And I guess that referral comes through content. Um, so you need to encourage them to happen effectively, but recognize that there's kind of 2 different types as well. So you have to earn it and you have to ask as well.
Yeah, it's a completely different dynamic, right? Okay, and I do want to tap into your story as well, Martin. I know that every consultancy journey is unique, Do you remember what was the pivotal moment that made you decide to venture into this world of consultancy?
Total mistake. Which is, I was hands-on techie originally. So even though I'd worked at IBM, for example, for a period of time, and I did some consulting as a project manager back in the late 90s, but I didn't really understand what consulting was at that point. And then it was just after the 7/7 bombings, actually, that I then got a job back in London, having worked in Cambridge for 3 years. Um, and I thought the role was very much a technical architect. So I thought I'd be going the next stage on, had an MCSE and lots of technical certifications. So I thought I'd be getting hands on. And then it was this thing called consulting, right? And it was really like I remember my first thought thinking, people are going to pay me the value of a car to write them a report. And that just seemed a bit weird. So I kind of fell into it by mistake. And then actually I fell in love with it over time. I really do love the whole concept of consulting, but it wasn't necessarily a specific choice I made. I just kind of fell into it in a similar way that I fell into marketing later on.
I love that. Somebody described it once, the world of consultancy as being a bit like the relationship between Yoko Ono and John Lennon, in that, and I'll explain that. At one point, I believe they decided that they wanted a swimming pool, and for whatever reason, didn't have the money to do so at the time. So Yoko's advice was, write the swimming pool. And one of John Lennon's songs was the catalyst for them being able to afford a swimming pool. I've probably bastardized that story massively, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I know that part of your story, Martin, you do talk about this very openly on your website, and it's got the sort of backstory. You talk about essentially that moment that you hit financial rock bottom. There was a point at which where you had to kind of start things up with, I believe, a roundabout or even less than £1,000 in the bank. So looking
Mm.
back, how has that sort of shaped the advice that you now give to your clients? How has that kind of driven you forward?
Yeah, that was the moment for me that kind of started my journey into marketing. So my background is as a management consultant, mostly around technology. Um, so lots of random projects, like I did the Bank of England's data center strategy. I've done strategy in Abu Dhabi, France, lots of different places. But I wasn't a marketer. And I started my own firm with all these grandiose views as to how in 3 years' time I was going to be doing 5 million annual revenue and then 10 million, etc. And I started really well because I sold to people that I already knew, right? And I think that's how most consultancies start. They start by people already doing consultancy. They think they can do better on their own, and they've got a network, and so they sell to that network. And that's what I'd done successfully for the first couple of years, really thinking that I'd made it, right? I was flying. But then as you get towards that 2 year point, you realize you've exhausted the current available opportunities from that network. And suddenly you haven't got a marketing problem, you've got a sales problem by that point. It's too late for marketing, right? Your pipeline's empty, you've got a sales problem, and that's all about prospecting. But I recognize that actually I should have been doing marketing all along. And it's a complicated topic to understand, I think. So I literally got to a point where I had £1,000 in the bank. I think it was £1,038 I had left. And bearing in mind, I had 2 children, a wife, a house, mortgage, car loans, all the trappings of middle class life. Um, and I had to do something. And what I did, I've always had this view that you can't save your way to success, right? You have to invest your way out. So I bought with only £1,000. I bought into a $11,000 training course, and I managed to kind of pay half of it there on a credit card or something. And I remember waking up pretty much having like a panic attack that night. I've never had a proper panic attack, I don't think. But I was like, what have I done? No money, and I've spent loads, and I've committed to spending a load more. But then what else can you do, right? You can't squeeze that sponge any further and get any more out of that £1,000. It's £1,000, So that's where I kind of started to spend lots of money on marketing and training courses and business coaches, etc., etc. Do you know what? I think realistically, I probably spent 100 grand over a few years trying to solve this marketing problem. And what that taught me was that there is hardly anyone in marketing land that understands strategy or understands how to market a consulting business. And that sounds quite grandiose, but it's true, right? And what it was is that all of these companies were ready, willing, and able to take my money, regardless of how ready I was to go marketing. So I did a bit of cold calling. The business coach said to do cold calling. And when I say I did a bit, I did the classic thing where you write them a letter, you make it a lumpy envelope. So I found these really cool business card holders on eBay. They were like 69 pence each, but they looked super cool and they're like leather. And as you opened it, the business card slid out. So I included those, or one of, with my business card saying, hey, if we'd have met, I'd have given you my business card. And I followed up, and this was to like CIOs of law firms, for example. And I followed up with a call, which is such a shit way to start your day, with rejection. Um, and I remember talking to this one CIO at a law firm, and I said, "Oh, hi, yes, Martin Williams. Did you get my letter?" And he said, "No, I didn't. And if I did, I'd have probably thrown it in the bin." Which I thought was quite funny because I was thinking that's exactly what I'd have done. And then I remember like, I spoke to him for 8 minutes and achieved absolutely nothing. Right. So then I realized I'm pretty shit at cold calling. This is not what I want to do. Um, so I thought I'll outsource it, right? I'll find a telemarketing agency. I'll find someone stupid enough to want to do this for a job every day. But I guess it's not their rejection, it's their client's rejection. So then I spent 4 grand on a telemarketing agency, and that got me 2 meetings. One of them, as soon as I turned up to the building, I was like, this is just not right at all. And I can't even remember the other one, so it must have been even worse. So then that's when it started to dawn on me. All these people will sell you services. I had a digital marketing agency that was doing some work for me. But none of them kind of said, well, look, what problems do you solve? Who are you solving those problems for? Why would they choose you?
Yeah.
If they'd have spent the time asking those 3 simple questions, I'd have probably been much more successful. And that's when I pivoted. So I thought, you know what, we got to a point where actually I'd spent so much time and money and effort trying to understand this stuff. And I started to build frameworks and systems because that's just the way my mind kind of works. And then other consulting business owners that I knew then started asking me, well, actually, can you help us with our marketing? So that was at the point that I pivoted. So in many respects, if I hadn't have got down to that, just over £1,000 in the bank, I probably wouldn't even be doing marketing now. And that was 10 years or so ago now.
I do want to expand on that, Martin, because I think that, I mean, in your case, and I think a few of us have taken that risk at some point in our business life. Sounds like a bit of a Hail Mary, as the Americans would call it. It's that kind of last ditch attempt. And and I feel that there are a lot of boutique consultancies out there that are in better sort of financial condition, at least I hope so, and yet are still reluctant to invest in marketing. Why do you think that is? Because you must hear this all the time.
Yeah, I think it's because marketing is almost one of those things where if you're in business in a professional manner, you just need to do it, right? And I think the problem with digital marketing and the rise of digital marketing is everything came down to statistics and attribution. Yeah, so marketing's got, as you well know, marketing has kind of two halves. You've got your brand development stuff, and then you've got your kind of lead nurturing, the kind of second half to it. So the notion of two-speed marketing is referred to in marketing circles. And I think what happened with the rise of digital marketing is people stopped doing the brand stuff and they started putting everything into getting people over the line, essentially. And what that has in terms of all of the research around that is you don't really grow if you just focus on this basically performance marketing, if you focus on trying to get people over the line all the time rather than just building your reputation. And I think what that did is it made general businesses, not just consulting, say, well, what's the return on investment? Show me how I'm going to make money by spending on this marketing. And because of that, and because of the false promises made by all the SaaS platforms, for example, everyone swung too far towards performance marketing. And what we're seeing now massively, because so many changes, is everyone's swinging back to the more brand stuff, to whether it's personal branding or whatever. But that stuff takes a long time to have an actual impact. So I think the challenge for anyone making that decision to spend in marketing is to go, well, actually, I'm going to spend now, and I might not see a return for 12 months, 18 months, maybe even 24 months. So you really got to be committed. And I think even when you make that commitment, there's always going to be that, well, where's the results now? How's it going to help me in the next 3 months? I've got utilization targets to meet, I've got revenue targets to meet, etc. So you do, I guess you have to be kind of brave as well as almost bought into the religion of marketing and what it actually achieves.
Yeah, I like that. I agree, by the way. I think I see so many focused on that performance marketing aspect, the promotional campaign side of things. And I equate it to the metaphor I often use is trying to out train a bad diet. If your brand, if your positioning
Yeah.
and messaging isn't sound, then you can do all the marketing you like, but it's always going to underperform. There will always be an aspect of money left on the table. And I get the timeline side of things as well, Martin, especially if it's entirely a sort of inbound approach that you're providing content and you're running those campaigns in the expectation of people coming to you, then that can take a while. But we've also got to reflect on the facts, and you've said, of course, you did a lot of telesales and telemarketing along that journey, and the lumpy mail aspect as well. And I've heard authors like Trish Batutsi, who wrote the Sales Development Playbook, I think it was called. She talks about this idea of all bound, the mix of inbound and outbound, and that actually one or the other doesn't really work, that there has to be a mix of both. Do you align with that?
I do align with that, and probably quite recently, to be honest with you, because I guess part of it is if you spend too much time on LinkedIn, right? If you spend too much time on any social platform, you start to believe what you're seeing on that platform all the time. I think inbound is brilliant, and I have absolutely won and continue to win work through inbound. But sometimes it's that notion of you need to nudge people over the line, right? And that for me personally is the most uncomfortable place for me. I love sales. I find sales dead straightforward, really. When it comes to sales, I think what's not to like? You've got somebody that wants to talk to you, you're there to help them. Well, if you don't charge for what you do, then you will never be able to help anyone else. I just don't get why people don't like sales. But it's that bit between marketing and having a sales conversation, the prospecting piece, which I believe belongs to sales if you were to separate it as a function. But it's that prospecting bit that is hard because it is like I often say marketing and probably and sales as well are almost the opposite skill set to a consultant, right? Because a consultant does stuff that you've asked them to do, gets feedback that's generally positive, and just doesn't fail. If you failed 3% of the time as a consultant, you'd have a problem, and you'd do everything possible to make sure you didn't fail again. If you now look at marketing, if we get 3% success, we run around clapping our hands. We're joyful that, hey, 3% of people responded to an ad. So it's the mindset wise, it's the complete opposite to what a consultant is. But back to your original question, absolutely. I think if you purely focused on inbound and you skipped that prospecting bit, the bit that just helps nudge either nudging your content in front of people or just getting them over the line to have a conversation, then you're just making it hard. It's almost like you're doing, I don't know, you're running 1,500 meters, and then in the last 200 meters you decide to walk. That's you're just ruining all the effort that you've put in beforehand.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. I want to pick up as well. In a lot of your content, Martin, you often talk about trust being more important than traffic. And I think we all sort of buy into that idea when it comes to consultancy, because we're people doing business with people. Trust has to be there before any sort of transaction is going to happen. But if I'm a consultancy founder who's naturally a bit skeptical about the idea of just foregoing traffic in favor of trust, how do you address that? How does building trust actually turn into revenue?
I think that whole topic is getting even harder at the moment. And I think the reason it's getting harder is if you look at LinkedIn, which is kind of the social media playground for consultancies, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you traffic has absolutely tanked this year. The change in algorithm And I often wonder if that's almost an own goal for LinkedIn. If people are getting that little traction on their posts, then why bother? But I'm not sure if it's the algorithm's fault or humans. Because if you look at what gets traction, it's surface level stuff. LinkedIn is not the place to go for deep insight. And the more surface level and broader your posts are and your content, the greater the reach. My greatest reach post recently was a picture of my motorbike, right? And I don't consult in motorbikes, because it's a social thing. So you can see why humans respond to that. But that makes that whole building trust thing much harder, because the way things are going with zero click marketing, for example, where effectively people aren't clicking on stuff in Google anymore because AI, they're either not even going to Google, they're just going to AI, or Google in its rich snippets and its AI gives you the answer. Then actually building trust as a consulting firm, as the individual thought leaders within it, becomes even more important, whilst at the same time even harder to do, because all of the metrics that you would have used before, the reach of your post, the impressions, that kind of thing, um, is really hard to achieve meaningful answers now. So it almost requires even more faith in people that it's the right thing to do. But I think you've got to remember, it's not just digital channels, right? Go back to some of the old school stuff, round tables, maybe less so exhibitions. You can still do exhibitions, but kind of real in-person events. There's so many factors that have changed probably since kind of COVID time. Um, but I think going forward, that ability to I hate the term personal brand because it sounds like influencers, but if you think of thought leaders, to act, and to be an actual thought leader, being a thought leader doesn't mean just post regularly on LinkedIn, right? That just means you're a social media user. So I think to kind of develop trust around individual thought leaders and the support that it needs from a firm to do that, because marketing and consulting firm isn't just about spending on a department, the marketing department or external agencies. It's about saying, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to take a slice of billable utilization time from some of our best people
Yeah.
and get them to spend that time on marketing, because marketing is everyone in the business, but the actual marketing function is merely the orchestrator, right? Everyone else has to contribute. This is perhaps what's quite unique in any professional services firm. So that trust building thing is way more important and way harder to do, and getting harder at the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, many years ago, I used to talk on the personal brand and thought leadership side of things. I think there were many who were reticent to put themselves out there. This would have been, not
Mm.
long after the advent of social media. My advice to them was, don't don't aim to be a thought leader, because true thought leadership is actually very difficult to attain. But start with being a thought provider. Start with putting your thoughts
Yeah.
out there without any real sort of effort to be to have a different voice or to stand out. And of course, now my views have changed dramatically, because there are so many content providers out there, right? The
Yeah.
socials are awash, our email inboxes are awash, our DMs are awash with all this inbound content. And so now more than ever, you have to have that sort of polarizing voice. You almost have to say what others are thinking but are unwilling to say, right? Is that what you're seeing as a need, irrespective of what the algorithms might be doing?
Yeah. I think it goes back to that same challenge of being opposite skill set. So when you're a consultant and you're delivering a report, say, and that report is maybe going to a dozen different people, right? Somewhere around that in terms of number of people actually going to read it. And what your job is as a consultant is to get all those people to come to agreement and to manage objections, and you're kind of working with your client to get them to make some kind of change or transformation. And so your job is to get them on side. If you want to stand out as a thought leader, sometimes it's quite useful to polarize your audience, because the moment you start repelling people is the moment you start attracting them. But you've never repelled people before, right? In a consulting gig, because if one particular person is a detractor, you don't just go, well, they're not for me, right? That's a good thing. Let me look after you guys. You have to get that person on side. So it's a completely different skill set. And I also say, like, I've never used the word love in a consulting report, right? Because you don't bring emotions into consulting, but you do in marketing.
Mm.
So again, in order to have the confidence as a consultant to start putting yourself out there, there's an old I think it's Hertzberg, or video on YouTube, and it's brilliant because he's smoking on the stage whilst giving a lecture. So it's probably from like the 60s or something, and it's all about motivation. I did once send this to an old CEO, and he wasn't very happy, because the point I was making was, and the point this video makes is, if you want to motivate, so what Hertzberg says, if you want to motivate someone to play the piano, you have to teach them to play the piano. Yeah, and that's quite a useful metaphor, because I don't know how to play the piano, and I'm sure it's bloody hard, right? And it's the same principle with, if you want someone to become a thought leader, it's a lot more than just going, right, hey, look, you need to write some stuff, or you need to go and present, or give a bit of time to the marketing function. That's not going to work. You got to actually train these people to go, well, this is how you become a thought leader. This is how you build a personal brand. And it's a lot more than just saying, this is the channel or tactic you're going to use. It's about helping them understand, how do they change as an individual? How do they learn this completely new job effectively alongside? Because imagine if you put a piece out there as a thought leader, and then you're in a client meeting, let's say of a big corporate, and then someone says, oh, I read your post the other day. I don't really agree with what you said there. So you've got to manage that, haven't you? You've got to go, well, look, let me explain a lot, and not step back and go, oh no, I didn't really mean it, but effectively stand for your point of view while still being respectful to the people around you. And again, that's a different way to how you are on social media, where you can be relatively disrespectful to people that disagree. It's
Yeah, well,
complicated, isn't it?
no, it's good. I think you're right. And the advice I give is, look, there's enough vanilla content out there, and we have to. And I said this yesterday for the first time. I said, you've got to be less vanilla and more rum and raisin. There's got to be a bit of a spike in it, And
Yeah.
I'm making myself hungry just saying that. But the reality is that vanilla does not work. It doesn't provide that pattern interrupt, and I think that's why things like the motorbike picture really sort of stop the scroll with people, because it stands out
Yeah.
in what is an otherwise quite dry feed in LinkedIn when it comes to that content, I think.
Yeah.
While we're on that sort of marketing tactic side of things, Martin, I do want to sort of tap into that. I wonder if there is a tactic that you think consultancy firms completely overrate, and perhaps, why do you think that it's still being sold like it's the holy grail? Why is there something that people are doing that they absolutely shouldn't be?
Yeah. So um I separate the logic into marketing strategy, marketing tactics, and then marketing channels. And there are 11 tactics that I think are relevant to a consulting firm. There's on my website, there's a framework where you can download, and it shows them all. But they're effectively in three layers. So tactics at the bottom, there's three, which is like referrals, repeat business. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. But I think your question is more around the kind of channel side of things. And I think any approach that is single channel is high risk and high probability of failure. And we see that all the time, when we're scrolling social media. If you think about LinkedIn itself, so the people that are most successful on LinkedIn and have the biggest followings on LinkedIn tend to be the people that sell LinkedIn services, right? That's an echo chamber, isn't it? So how many people have successfully built a consulting business purely from doing LinkedIn, right? I'm sure they're out there, but I haven't come across them. And the reality is that successful marketing requires an omni-channel approach. So you need to use multiple channels, but in unison. Whereas I think what people tend to do is just add on another channel, but in isolation. So we're going to do exhibitions, but then they don't necessarily use, say, social media to promote the exhibition, or to share stuff, or to follow up. So there's a lot of channels at play, but not in cohesion. So I think the short answer to your question is, every channel is wrong, if you just do a single channel, because it's just too high risk, because it changes so much. And you look at Google can change its algorithm, any digital can change its algorithm, and everything that did work suddenly doesn't. And the same with YouTube. A lot of people are getting really poor reach on YouTube, which is where a lot of people are telling everyone to go now.
Yeah.
And again, the people today, this is sometimes where I think maybe I never particularly perceived myself as being that smart, but sometimes I think maybe I should have been dumber. Because the people that seem to be most successful right now are the people that are sharing the most basic of business advice. This is how you build a successful business. People that are hugely successful, people like James Smith, etc., PT, gym, then Alex Hormozy. This almost seems like the classic route now, isn't it? Start a gym, train other people how to not do gym stuff, but run a gym business, then move that into train anyone how to grow any business.
Yeah.
And that surface level stuff seems to be a really easy way to make a lot of money, right? Rather than truly understanding a specific industry and going deeper beyond. And it almost feels like when you listen to those people, you're like constantly gaslighted as to how crap you are because you haven't made a ton of money, even though all they're doing is offering very basic business advice.
Do you think in that respect, Martin, that a lot of consultancies kind of overcomplicate their messaging and what they do? They're perhaps trying to sell themselves as experts, but actually end up confusing the market a lot of the time by using overly complex language, overly complex frameworks. Is that a thing, do you think?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I think if I look back to when I was in practice, effectively, the thing I was always, I guess, I always think there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, right? And I rode that line a lot. Um, and I was all about me. I was all out for me. If I look back, God, there's so many things I do differently. But I liked delivering difficult strategy projects. And the moment that project was finished, I was interested in the next one. Right, that client was dead to me pretty much. Right, there was a sales team that looked after people, but even so, I didn't have the right approach. I always wanted to kind of jump on to the next thing. And what I never did, what I never really understood was what was the problem that the client had that I was fixing. Because instead I focused on the skill set that I had. So you used a funny dentist analogy on me earlier, so I'll try and use a similar one, which won't be anywhere near as good. But it's the kind of principle of pulling out a tooth, say you, but not really understanding, well, what was the pain that meant that tooth needed to be pulled? What was the experience of that pain? And what would happen if they didn't resolve that pain and all the wider implications of that? As a consultant, I didn't really think about any of that stuff. We didn't really do marketing as a business. We were in the firm I was at the time, 350 people all around the world, following financial centers. The people that built the business did fantastic. I certainly didn't appreciate it at the time. Like I said, confidence bordering on arrogance. But we only had one marketer, and that marketer was really sales support, case studies, maybe managing a few exhibitions or talks, that kind of thing, but not really hardcore marketing. And not no disrespect to that individual, they were good at what they did, but we didn't really make much of marketing. And so I wasn't really taught about any of the wider value of the things that I did and the benefit to the clients. I just focused on being an expert tooth puller, right? So then if you then say, well, how do you turn that into something that resonates in the market? I would tend to talk about the things that I did. It's not my proposals. My proposals were so long and I was so proud of them because I would describe everything that I would do. And what I wanted to say was, look how flipping amazing I am because I can do all this stuff. And then one day it dawned on me, it's like, why don't I start with outcomes? Why don't my proposal say, hey, this is what you want, and by the way, this is how I get to it, but that's really not that important for the proposal. So I kind of learned that a lot along the way. But yeah, I think when consultants go marketing, they go with the tool set of delivering consulting, and it's just it's not unvaluable. It's massively valuable, but not at that point.
Yeah, I think we do well to start with that whole Simon Sinek approach of start with why, and that's what you mean about the outcomes. I guess is what is the pain that we're solving? What is the impact that would be created by fixing that particular problem? And sometimes stripping it down to that biggest or most impactful problem first, rather than this large swathe of things that we could do. I think that aspect of simplicity we could really bring to bear in the world of consultancy. I know that you've got a framework, maybe the one that you made reference to earlier, Martin, but I want to dig into your pyramid of trust framework there at Camford. Can you walk us through how it helps consultancies to build credibility and to win clients?
Yeah, sure. So in marketing, if you've studied marketing, you'll be familiar with the marketing funnel. Okay. And most people generally have heard of a marketing funnel. And I think funnel mentality makes sense in a consumer goods world. Where effectively you're trying to, even if you run a shop, a retail shop, you're trying to push as many people through the door as possible. And all the way, you're trying to encourage them to open their wallet. So you have discounts, you have multi-buys, you have all of these things where you're kind of forcing people through a funnel. And we often go shopping and come back with something we never, I mean, does anyone go shopping anymore? We used to. Go to a high street, you come back with something you never even went out to buy. But consulting doesn't work that way. You can't you can't encourage someone to buy consulting if they don't need it. It just doesn't make any sense. So as I was trying to get my head around marketing originally, and it was things like recognizing that people are at different stages of buyer awareness, your understanding of their problem. So then I was thinking, well, does that mean I've got to write like three versions of the same blog article, or do three versions of the same webinar? It got very confusing. So then over time I realized that, and there was a chap, there is a chap, I presume still, a guy called Derek Halpin in the States, and he used to run Social Triggers. Unfortunately, he gave up on marketing and went off to do nutrition bars or some other dodgy product. But that's where I learned this concept of the oblivious, the afflicted, the informed. And that's the kind of three states of buyer awareness. So they're either oblivious to their problem, or they're afflicted by it, they're feeling the pain, but they don't really know what to do, or they're informed, which is they know the problem, they know the pain, they know the solution, and they're really evaluating whether you're a good fit. So I started to think about this and think about the different channels that I'm using, different marketing channels. And I thought, well, actually, what you've got to do is really use marketing channels to take people on that journey from being oblivious to afflicted to informed, to the point that they'll either contact you or happily accept you contacting them.
Yeah.
So I drew this in a pyramid fashion, effectively, where at the bottom is the oblivious, middle is the afflicted, top is the informed, and it's effectively an inverse funnel, right? And so rather than trying to push people through, the concept of the pyramid is to say you've got to draw them towards you. You've got to effectively serve them with something that gets their attention initially, and that could be giving a talk somewhere. It could be an exhibition stand. It could be a social media post. It doesn't have to be digital all the time, but something that captures their attention. And I often think that, like, when you do a consulting gig and you do that kind of initial discovery phase, often a lot of the time your clients know they have an issue, but they're struggling to really articulate it to their colleagues. Okay, so it's kind of useful helping them initially to go, well, look, this is really what your problem is and the impact to it. So your content has to do a similar thing. So you capture that attention at the bottom of the pyramid, and then because they see it and they engage with it, they're going to hopefully take on your next piece of content where you go a bit deeper. So you might do, let's say, a carousel post on LinkedIn, and it will be, I don't know, 5 reasons why you can't get DevOps working in your business, something like that. And so that's going to capture the attention of people interested in DevOps. And then what you can do is you can then write a blog article, potentially on each of those 5, or that goes deeper on that. Or if you do that and then you invite people to a webinar, whatever. So you're kind of creating that journey. You're moving them from the bottom to the top of the pyramid, but also recognizing that humans are difficult beasts and entirely unpredictable. And so I like to see the pyramid model as snakes and ladders. Yeah. So actually, you get people coming towards you, and you think, "Oh, this is interesting." Next thing you know, they've gone. They slid back down to the bottom again. So what you're doing all the time is trying to keep getting them to come towards you, such that when you put out a call, or they call you. And I'll give you a good example of this. So I did some work in my early days for a water utility, and one of them was they needed to take credit and debit card payments to be PCI DSS compliant. Such a mouthful. Payment card industry data security standards. And need to be compliant. And the easiest way to be compliant was to effectively outsource card payment services. So they engaged me to do that outsourcing for them, to go find them a provider. So I did that. And then what I did is I turned that work into a guide. And I can't remember what I called it. It wasn't called the ultimate guide, but it was something similar, which effectively said, here's how to achieve outsourcing for payment card industry data security standards. Then I got calls of that because people would download it. I would capture their contact details and I could follow up. So it's just an example of that. The notion of the pyramid of trust is to say, firstly, you have to invite people to consume more of your content. You have to educate them. So in consulting, we market through education, and the pyramid gives you a way of saying, well, each time we do something in marketing, where does it sit in this journey? rather than going, hey, let's do that exhibition. We did it last year. Sounds good. Well, where does it fit? That's a very long answer. Sorry.
No, it makes perfect sense. I think it's a great framework and flips the script on that classic funnel dynamic, as you say. Martin, we've reached that point in the call where I ask you to participate in our snog, marry, avoid section. It's not what you think. A snog is a quick win. What would you advocate as a quick win, perhaps in the world of marketing, for your consultancies out there?
So I'm checking my notes here because I did make a note on this one. So my quick win would be to stop talking about yourself, right? Because I think when consultants go marketing, they start in the sales process rather than the marketing process. So they start talking about themselves.
Yeah.
This is how long we've been around. This is how many offices we've got. This is the services we do. There's not a hint of what problems they solve. So my first point would be stop talking about yourself.
Yeah, I saw Andy Bounds speak many years ago, the author of The Jelly Effect, and he presented this idea of, so many people say, we do this, we do that, we've been around since, and he calls it weeing all over everyone. As soon as you hit their website, that's the message that comes at you. Okay, and Mary, what is one thing that you absolutely couldn't live without in your consultancy, Martin?
So I've probably overdone this drum in this conversation, but omni-channel marketing, that's the one thing you can't live without, because everything else is just noise. I think you've got to think about how do you get all of those different channels within the tactics that you choose to kind of come together. And the point I made earlier around inside out and back to front is everyone. So inside out is where we just spoke about, where you talk about yourself rather than the client problems. Back to front is everyone starts at channels and then they almost work backwards as they find the hard way, like I did, the expensive way, that all of that stuff is a waste of time without having a strategy in the first place.
Yeah, great. And an avoid, what's one thing that you would advocate any consultancy ditch right now that's not serving them?
Marketing agencies.
Controversial.
Specifically, any marketing agency of any type that engaged with you and didn't ask you what problems you solve, right? So any marketing agency, plus any marketing agency that throws in a strategy for free because it means I haven't got a clue what it means, that there's so much money being spent. You see agencies get high churn all the time, and I don't think that's an issue with the clients. I think it's an issue with the agencies. So you have to engage agents. I think agencies are actually starting to get a bit better at this. I think strategy is becoming a bit more understood. Maybe the likes of Mark Ritson and his courses help him with that. But you need to, when you're engaging with an agency, what you want them to be asking you is those difficult questions. And I think that's hard for consultancies. What problems do you solve? Well, we solve all sorts of problems. And the point I make is you can do whatever you want for whoever you want. You just can't market that. Yeah. Right. So when it comes to marketing, just choose a problem to market, because problems are for marketing, services are for selling. So choose a problem, go market that, see how you get on. And so any agency that doesn't start there and instead starts at the other end, then get rid.
When you said specifically, I thought you were going to name names. I was hovering over the bleep button there. No. I'm glad you didn't. Martin, where can people find you? Where can they interact with you? Where can they find out more of your stuff?
So you can have a look at my website, which is camfordmc.com, CAMFORD. Or look me up on LinkedIn. And the reason it's called Camford, by the way, in case that's on the tip of your tongue, is because when you start a business, it's impossible to come up with a name that no one else has used. And every single Latin word, because we all try to be clever in consultancy, that's already existed beforehand. So you either can't find it on Company's House or you can't find the domain name. Yeah. So Camford MC is a contraction of where I grew up, which is Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire. And interestingly, and I didn't know this, is an alternative to Oxbridge. So it might make me sound slightly clever as well, but purely accidentally.
You never know. And let's face it, all the Latin ones have been used on The Apprentice up to this point as teams.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, that just ruins it. Martin, thank you so much for joining us today on the Consultancy Edge.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's been a pleasure.